Hello, my name is Tammy Rose, and welcome to Concord Days. The fates only are unkind that keep us asunder, but my friend is ever kind. I am of the nature of stone. It takes the summer's sun to warm it. That's a quote by Thoreau about his friendship with Emerson. And today I am very excited to be talking to Tyson Forbes and Sam Elmore, creators of Nature, the Walking Play. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm well. I'm getting ready to dive into this show back on the East Coast, and I'm happy to talk about the creation of the show and not just the logistics of it. So happy to be here.
Exactly. So let's talk about the show itself, like what it is, and like break down, like, and then we'll talk about how you guys came up with it. Let's talk about your relationship, like, and also, your backgrounds, and also just to let you know, I consider myself a playwright historian. I have been a stage manager in New York City for like 10 years. I've seen productions of this show, and I think it's amazing. I'm really impressed with just like the quality of the writing as well as the quality of the company. So can one of you just sort of like just start by saying like what is, like, just describe what it is, for the people who haven't seen it yet. Just start there.
I'm going to dive in here, Sam.
Take it, Tyson.
Well, it really started as a desire of both Sam and myself to create a ritual for audiences in nature and to connect people in a deeper way to their natural environment. And while there's lots of plays out there that explore nature on a certain level, you're often seeing them from the interior of a black box or a proscenium theater. And we wanted to take people out into nature and explore that relationship. So we started to build this piece that takes people on a journey through their landscape and really starts to address that connection that we all have with our natural world. And that's exactly what we're doing now. It's a moving play that goes through an environment that takes place in different settings within a park, within an arboretum, on an estate, and really explores these dynamics of what it means to be connected to nature. So yeah,
right. And the heart of it is the relationship between Emerson and Thoreau, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
With all of its ups and downs, because
all of its ups and downs. Though interestingly, that's the writing and crafting of that relationship sort of came later in the creative process.
Really?
The initial improvisations were around those universal experiences that we have in nature. Growing up as a child in nature, rolling in the grass, the sensory perceptions of nature, smell, taste, feeling, light, and just that point that we all share in that we whether we grew up in the city or whether we grew up on farms, we all have some sort of interconnection with the natural world. So we were trying to find those themes that really resonate in everybody, and bring those out in the experience of the play.
Well, and honestly, you're talking to somebody who has spent most of COVID just staring at her computer. So the very fact that you're talking about like a fully immersive experience, and my memory of this is when you had staged it at the Old Manse, and like there were I feel like 10 different locations, and some of which you return to. And, it's like always like, all right, everybody just pick up your chairs and we're going to go somewhere else. And this scene is going to be in the shade. And this scene is going to be in a place on the property that you would never think. And, it's exactly what you're talking about. Like, being in a theater is a very, how can you say, like, sterile environment, right? Because you're in a chair and
Temperature controlled.
yeah, exactly.
And
Yeah.
Tammy, can I ask you a question? Was the Old Manse a place you had been before?
That is an excellent question. Yeah, so I grew up in Waltham, which is like 20 minutes away from Concord. So when I was a kid, I have all of these memories of, field trips, maybe going to the Old North Bridge annually.
Yeah.
And literally the only places that I would be, even like as a grown up, the only places I would be like around the bridge area. I feel like I had a very intimate relationship with like the parking lot, because you're always aware of like, oh, where did I park, blah, 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 and going into the house.
Yeah.
Right. And then that's about it. And like, oh, maybe, there's some greenery in the back, but
That's so cool.
I should go there, but I'm going to spend my time in the bookshop because I have something else to do or whatever,
Yeah.
So I had no idea that there were so many different, little nooks and crannies.
Yeah.
Beautiful spaces on that property.
Yeah. And that's been one of the surprises over the last 10 years, I'd say, is this consistency of feedback of like, I've come to this place all the time, and suddenly being given this opportunity, this new invitation to experience the place, not only in a different way, but I think at a different pace. Like, I think pacing was very intentional in the creation of the piece. And it's just such a joy to hear people say, I fell in love in a new way with a place that I already loved.
Yeah. And you're also giving people new ways to experience that space. Because if you just show up with your lunch or whatever, maybe you're going to have a picnic in a cute little area. But in the context of the play, you're like, oh, this is where that scene happened. And I have this sudden memory of, Emerson and Thoreau talking about this topic, or, as one of them dies, how eloquent it was, as, just to watch Emerson, like walk away or whatever,
Yeah.
And like the whole thing about, who has that quote of like, art is about making the familiar unfamiliar, and making it new. Like, that's exactly what your play does. So wait, so 10 years? I hadn't realized it was this long. So
10 years, 2010 into 11, we wrote it, right, Tyson? And first kind of, it wasn't quite a premiere. It was like first staging of the draft, if you will. I think was 2011.
We had an initial staging. We had one performance in like June 6th of 2010, which we just jam-packed so much creative work towards. And then we took the entire summer off and restaged it at the end of the summer. So it was actually great because we had this initial performance that gave us all this feedback. And then we went back to the drawing board and we got it ready for this run at the end of that summer. So.
Yeah. And then you have to essentially restage it at every venue, right?
Yeah. And I can say that Tyson and Markel, who is our third co-creator, Markel Kiefer, they have developed this incredible capacity to walk onto a piece of land and start to visualize. Because more often than not, it's, all of this needs to be mowed or leave this wild, and audience is here and sun's going to be there. And it's like watching, I don't know, just magic happen of like, suddenly you look at this raw landscape and they start to see, okay, this is how it will flow. And some walks are quite short, a city block, and others have quite a journey in them. I don't know if we've ever measured the full walk, but
I think it's been up to a mile. I think that's been our longest one. We were at Morton Arboretum in Chicago years ago, and that was a long out and back. And it was also during a heat wave.
Yes, it was.
It definitely tested the endurance of the audience. But that's a part we really look forward to, is seeing how the landscape kind of calls to the show, and what the best integration of all those aspects of a natural place are that can play in and really enhance the show. It's about highlighting that natural environment and really working with it. I mean, a great show completely uses the set that it's in. It doesn't just sort of sit there like a painting in the background. So
and I was going to say, Yeah, like I feel like you've created literally the best solution to like for a set designer, because you essentially like, just leave it up to nature itself.
Yeah. You can climb on the trees, you can emerge from the grass, you can use the full depth of field. It feels kind of cinematic when we're staging things, because Markel will be on the bullhorn, talking to people 300 yards away and coordinating dances in these sort of vast landscapes, or they can be intimate sort of, nooks of a wood as well. But it's fun to be able to work with that dimension of scale in it. So
right, and you said cinematic because you are essentially framing each shot, and audiences can change from like, being really far like audience left to being far audience right, and personally I always find it interesting to sit at the back of the audience so you can also gauge the audience's response as well.
Oh yeah.
But when I was attending the play, I was like, no, every so often I want to be in the front row,
Yeah, we will jump in your lap if you let us.
Exactly. And so wait, because this is a very like Concord focused play, how does it get received in places like Chicago? And where else have you performed it?
We have performed it as far west as the Black Hills in South Dakota. And Sam actually came out for that performance. He wasn't in that show. He's performed in a number of other places, and we've also, as far east as the Old Manse. And Emerson and Thoreau are so woven into our kind of collective consciousness, I feel already. If you've grown up in America, if you've grown up in nature, you understand what they're talking about. They put on paper what so many of us know in our experience to be true as we relate to nature. And so that isn't lost on a Western audience or a Eastern audience. I feel like everyone has this in to the themes of the show. When you go to a place like the Old Manse and that community where, they're still celebrities, Emerson and Thoreau are still celebrities of that town, it has a whole nother resonance. And I remember when we arrived there, they were kind of blown away and coming up to us and saying, this is our story, what are you doing here from Minnesota? But, Sam and I are from the East Coast originally. We grew up in that landscape, and we share a lot of locations in our lives and landscapes that are actually in their writings. So it has an extra special resonance on the East Coast for sure, just because it's so much more in the culture.
Yeah, and just a tiny add-on to that. It's not a direct answer to your question, Tammy, but I would relate it to the fact that when we were writing, we were constantly asking, like, who is our audience here? Mm-hmm. And we made a really conscious choice to say that a 4, 5, 6-year-old should be as captured as somebody who has studied Thoreau and Emerson their whole life.
Yeah.
And so how can we bridge in that way is similar to the geography of like, yes, Concord has like, this is our story, like Tyson said, and it's a universal story too. So that was part of the intention, at least in creating it.
Good. Yeah. And I'm so excited to hear you guys say that like people like across America are also familiar with the story. I feel like I know lots of tour guides right in Concord who, experience people coming from Massachusetts who don't, who are visiting Walden for the first time, right? Or maybe if they hear about Emerson and Thoreau, they're like, yeah, one of them lived by a pond, maybe, this thing. And yeah, so, but I also agree that like, as a playwright, as a storyteller, you don't want to alienate any member of your audience, by saying, oh, well, of course, unless you know exactly what's on page 238 in Walden, you're not going to get this joke,
Yeah.
That's the relationship of Emerson and Thoreau and their friendship, their falling out a bit towards the end of their life. That's a really compelling story, and a device that an audience wants to like track, like how is this evolving over the course of the play. the deeper like conversation about like our relationship to nature, that's operating just as, you know, it's just as prevalent in the play. So it's wonderful to come back to that story and learn about their ideas, their writings, but the play is also operating on this more kind of subconscious level, in that it's dropping the audience into the world where these ideas emerged. And so you're experiencing the ideas, you're experiencing where these writings came from. You're not just kind of intellectually placing it and tracking it that way.
Yeah. And you guys had referred to your relationship where both of you come from Boston. And so so in addition to talking about like the plot of, you know, Henry and Waldo, let's also talk about, you know, what your story is. So Tyson and Sam, how did you guys, you know, move west, and why did you move west? Why did you leave the Boston area? Like,
Sam's moving further.
We may need a visual overlay. I don't know if it's in the budget, because we have like multiple traversing's of the states and timelines, and so we'll see if we can do it. So one interesting part of this is that I would say both of our like tap roots, or the land that we are most connected to, is about 7 miles apart, off the coast of Massachusetts, a part of the Elizabeth Islands. And we did not meet until we were in college. So there's 18 years where we didn't know each other, but we were within miles of one another. And likewise, a maybe 50 square foot spot in Colorado, where Tyson grew up and my parents relocated to. So there are these like anchors, East Coast, West Coast, where our families had been drawn to. And we had both, again, spent a ton of time having this direct experience of nature. And then we met in college, in the theater department of Middlebury College. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what to say about that decade. We met there. We did a ton of productions together. Our friendship started forming. And then we moved to Washington, D.C., where some colleagues of ours had started a theater company called Project Y. And so we went there, and I think our first production down there, or mine, was Terra Nova.
Yeah. Discovery of the South Pole.
Yep, Discovery of the South Pole, another great kind of experiential, nature-based play.
Well, and thank you very much for not asking us to go to one of the poles like that. That sounds like, you know, you could do a walking play there as well, but I don't think that I would be as excited.
I am making a walking play in a Minnesota winter this coming February. So if you want that experience, come on out. We'll shock you with negative temperatures.
Even worse than Boston.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Wow. So so when you guys were working on these other things, were you conspiring to create your own piece then, or were you sort of just like, we're just going to be actors and that's going to be my, you know, our main career focus?
There was a True West, Sam Shepard play was always this like, oh my gosh, that would be a great show for us to play, because we have this brother sibling thing, and it's such an amazing play and gets at some of the themes that I think we have always been drawn to.
Yeah. I can see that.
And then the conspiring, what would you say are the seeds of that, Tyson?
I think one of them was we both were like really influenced by dance. Sam especially went that route, because you worked with the dance company a bit.
Yeah, it was my minor in college, and I worked with the kind of touring dance company in college, and then it became a big part of my aesthetic as a theater creator, just kind of ensemble-based movement pieces, physical theater.
So we were both really driven by movement, and that became like one of the main parts of our vocabulary. We also became a part of a improv comedy troupe called Otter Nonsense. And just started developing, you know, in addition to all of the theater stuff we were doing together, we just started developing this improvisational shorthand. And we did some improvisational like dance pieces, theater pieces, and we were just very it was very easy for us to create quickly.
Yeah.
And while that was also happening, but though I would say it happened more outside of once we left Middlebury, was just like discovering this mutual love of being outside and being deep in wilderness. And that just we kept kind of, musing about different ways we could create a piece outdoors. And it took a while for that idea to kind of find roots, but it was clearly we wanted to like push the bounds of what we could do with an audience outside, because it tends to kind of get mishandled. Well, not mishandled, but it's just often theater outside is it gets diluted in some way, or there's aspects of being outside that don't really get considered. Right. And you don't tend to see like really kind of high level performance outside. So anyway, it was percolating.
No, like I understand what you mean. Like I've seen plenty of Shakespeare outside and some amazing Shakespeare, and then some other Shakespeare where it's kind of like, oh, everybody's going to love it just because it's Shakespeare. Right. And everybody's asleep, or, people are like, oh, I can't deal with the mosquitoes, so I'm going to leave early,
It's often a play that's just been put outside as opposed to a play that's been designed to be outside. So.
Yeah. And as Tyson mentioned, when we started, the palette was blank. It was just what some of those ingredients that we had talked about. It was like, okay, something magical happens when, like he was talking about, like being young on a beach, or like these vignettes, these moments that just were compelling us to create and to give form to. And we workshopped it for many weeks, and at the end of the time there was this debate of like, is this purely about nature? Is this about two men and their friendship and the evolution, like Tyson and Sam, or the archetype of the Tyson and Sam? Emerson and Thoreau had always been in the background, and it feels important to name Tyson's relationship to Emerson soon.
Let's
just time out to do that. And the last thing I'll say, as well as modality, is it inside? Is it outside? Is it a movie? What's the form? So it was not preconceived of this is a walking play about Emerson and Thoreau. Yeah. But Emerson and Thoreau were in the room because
we're going to out you. Yeah.
Whether I chose it or not, I am a great grandson of Ralph Waldo Emerson, and I grew up in that family, and that's one of the ties I have to the Elizabeth Islands off of Woods Hole and the shores of Massachusetts, and that to the landscape that really bonds Sam and I. And
how did the Emerson family get to those islands?
It's through their relationship to the sort of intermarrying that happened with the Forbes family. So John Murray Forbes was really instrumental in putting some houses on those islands and trail system and then are you also related to like the Forbes magazine empire? No, not that empire. Okay. No.
Just checking.
More the poet side of the Forbes family. That was, as I got more involved in theater, this idea of creating a piece around Emerson had always been percolating in my mind. And I'd seen Mark Twain Tonight with Hal Holbrook, and I'd seen these other kind of signature pieces of these, literary figures. And I don't really consider myself an intellectual in that sense. I mean, my way into the art is through movement. It's through creative writing. It's improvisation. So I didn't want to get in this very like headstrong piece, but I also wanted to share this, like, growing up in this family, these values, this sense of stewardship of land. And that's when we started to think, okay, these two can work together.
Because what was it like to grow up with that Emerson name and legacy and all of that stuff sort of hanging over you? Like, is it something that is hard for you to talk about at parties, or is it like something that you're completely proud of? Like, were your parents forcing you to read, Emerson's books when you were like 2? Like, what? Like, describe that.
I mean, I didn't. He was sort of this like, mythic character growing up. He's over the mantles of a lot of fireplaces, and and I grew up hearing little bits of his writing regularly, but a lot of his more philosophical writings weren't really accessible to me until I graduated from college. I read his stuff in high school, and most of it went over my head.
You're not alone.
But I came back to it and really dove into it and fell in love with it. Mm-hmm. And started to break it apart and try to understand it on a much deeper level. But it was more just growing up in that family, and there's such an emphasis on being outside, on going into wilderness, on stewardship of land.
So can I ask, like, what are the careers that other people in your family have, grown into? Are they also performers, or are they like, park rangers, or do you have accountants in your family?
Well,
are you the only person that has this passion?
There's a real mix. I'd say there's quite a spin of adventures in there, just in terms of like their hobbies of getting outside. There are definitely some park rangers. There's some people that have taken that exploration even further.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say there's like sort of a certain type of like job pursuits that family members have chosen. But
you mean they're normal? Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. And so Sam, what is it like to sort of be the metaphorical version of Thoreau to this guy who, whether he wants it or not, has the Emerson role kind of like inescapably put upon him?
Right. It was just a joy. I mean, I likewise I read Walden in high school, and, spent time at Walden Pond, and, once we finally said, okay, they are going to be our main characters, then I had this year that was just joyful of like everything I could read. And I kind of, I don't know, I just read a ton of stuff and just earmarked it and was like, this could go. And then I still have a bunch of the texts of just with all those skinny Post-its. That's like, okay, this has to do with that theme. This is the like, for us, like industrialism, like, oh, look, out of the reading starts to emerge text that we can start to shape to support our dramatic arc. So from a kind of playwright and just the kind of part of me that likes to learn and explore, that was really exciting to just go into that, and also learn the ways that we've kind of created the mythos of each of them, and how true or not that is, or why have we put Thoreau in that, painted him in that way. And then to and as Tyson said, in the early productions, I played Thoreau, and it fits me. I mean, it fits. I don't know how else to say it except it fits my body. Like, there's just a way in which, like, I could never play Emerson. It would be a farce. But like Thoreau is my physicality, my sensibility, really. And it was, it also allowed us to, Tyson and I, to play in our friendship and draw out things that maybe had always been there, but then, now we have to really, make this thing that's been there, like the extreme, even just our height or how we relate to costuming and movement on the land. Like, we got to play with that, which was super fun.
And like the tenderness and joy and rub of a friendship, and bring those out, which is something that doesn't get talked about much with these men.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to watch a compelling drama, you want to understand the more human side of who these people were. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say,
Again, like one last thing, to do that with the palette that we had, like to do that in a black box would have been so different. Like we got to tell the story of 10 years of a friendship from 200 yards away in a kind of clown-like physicality. And then the next scene, we get them having a cup of tea whoosh, in a cab.
on a stage.
Yeah.
And it's just like that, to be able to create with that kind of flexibility was super fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And then also there's like, there's an age difference, and there's a little bit of like the mentoring aspect that Emerson has, but then Henry's kind of asking him to support him for his first book, and Emerson and Waldo maybe isn't as as generous as Henry would have wanted. I think for Henry wanted a little bit more criticism. So when A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers came out, he was really hurt because he had hoped that Waldo would have, helped him a little bit there, not only promote it among his friends, but also maybe help him in the editing phase first, right? Like sometimes there's this tension between like two people who are friends, but who are also trying to have this artistic working relationship together. Did you guys have any conflicts? And like, were you afraid that like something similar was going to happen to you guys?
Certain, yes, of course we had conflict. Right? I don't know that I've had fear. There was I don't know. I don't know that I've had fear that it would go that way. It's more like, we're digging in and
yeah,
we get to add our co-creator, who happens to be Tyson's wife and partner in life, and co-artistic director and creator of their company. So we have the recipe for good, like honest, truly like creative tension, the kind of creative tension that allows something like this. If it were all like, hey, we're best buds and we always have been, like, super.
Yeah.
Nothing would have been created.
Well, and then if you're going to bring in somebody's wife, then let's also talk about Lydian.
Right? We're playing out the dynamics. Though I don't think they were quite similar in that regard. But
okay.
But yeah, Lydian is kind of a vital part of this, of our dramatic story that we tell, because there was this love interest, this kind of love triangle in a way between Lydian, Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Henry Thoreau.
Yeah.
So
and to be clear, because I know we're going to get letters and people are going to like attack me on the street, like it can be a love that is entirely platonic and it's still completely legitimate, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, you read the letters, but between the two of them, we actually use a number of passages from those letters, and they are incredidly
sensual almost.
Yeah, they are. They're very. It's a deep bond that existed, and I think that existed a lot more in sort of small town America, where our worlds were much more insulated, and we really leaned into the relationships we had with men with men, and women with men, and there wasn't this sort of satellite setup like we have. I live in the suburbs of Minneapolis right now. We kind of all live in our own world. There was a real dependence upon each other. So, I mean, that coupled with the fact that there was this like connection between Emerson and Thoreau, between Emerson and Lydian, both intellectual, emotional, the fact that Thoreau looked after the Emerson household for, months and months and months at a time.
By invitation. Waldo wanted him to sort of like move in and sort of, not replace him, but be like, be the man of the house and fix things and entertain the children and make sure that my wife is okay. And and I'm not sure if you guys know about Susan Cheever, who had written a book called American Bloomsbury that came out. So anytime that book is mentioned on a tour or whatever, like everybody just their hackles go up, because I think that relationship is kind of it's insinuated that it went beyond the platonic. And I feel like the way that you guys portray everything is sort of like you're capturing it, and it's part of a function of theater. It's part of a function of like, this is how you can understand that those letters are true.
Right.
because you see
Right.
the electricity going on, but at the same time, like you're saying, it's like these people, everybody would go out for walks together. They would see each other all the time. They're not living this suburban life. This is this is the kind of intimacy that happens when people live together and who are in a small town. But there's also the mores of the time where no, you can't cross any,
Yeah.
of course I wouldn't do that. Or, it would be a very big scandal. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we try to leave that question pretty open-ended in the show. I mean, you can see it going both ways, but it certainly creates a rift between Emerson and Thoreau. So whatever conclusions you want to make about the relationship between Lydian and Thoreau, there was definitely tension that came out of that from Emerson and Thoreau. So
I think it adds on to other areas where they have those differences. It's like it's the straw that breaks the camel's back, or you see to your point, Tammy, about the feedback on A Week on the Concord and Merrimack. There's these things that are unsatiated needs within the context of a lot of great friendship. That then kind of becomes this divisive event.
Yeah.
But that's how we frame it anyway.
Well, one of my clearest memories of seeing your performance is of the little boy, I think, who's playing Edward Emerson. Mm-hmm. And in the beginning, he doesn't want Thoreau because he's like, oh, this is a stranger in the house. And then, when Waldo returns, it's kind of like, well, wait a minute, I like Henry more. So I feel like that is something that doesn't always come out in history or when you're just reading stuff. But again, you're placing it within this is their reality, right? There are children there. There are other people, there are other relationship dynamics that add to that core relationship between the two people. And all these little things come out.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. So how do you, so you're bringing it back to the Boston area?
Yep.
Right?
We're teaming up with the trustees of reservations, who have produced this show better than any partner we've had throughout the U.S. They're just incredibly skillful at producing a theatrical piece outside, which is there are a lot of little nuances to doing that are tricky, but they're so good at producing outdoor events. And a lot of their venues are already so picturesque and beautiful and really accommodate audiences. So we are we had to decide this year because of the pandemic that we couldn't tour the show. We couldn't move a company from city to city like we do typically. We had to find a base that we would just land at. And our hope was then we could do productions within the area. So Boston just kind of called out to us, and the trustees called out, and it was like, this is a great relationship for this year, and our hopes of doing this at trustees locations in subsequent years as well. So we're going to be doing performances at three of their locations, north, west, and south of the city. And the exact dates and locations will all be announced on their website soon, but they're waiting to do a final announcement for that. So, and then it'll be 2 weeks at each of those venues. But the sites that I visited, I was just out there not long ago, and they're stunning. The Old Manse was an incredible location for the show. Nature was written at the Old Manse. So it has that extra resonance there.
Wait, Nature Emerson's book, not Nature the play, right?
Nature Emerson's essay, yeah. So, so that was extra special being there. But
so are you going to have new venues this time, possibly?
Yeah, all new venues, 3 new venues.
Yeah, and then so you guys had mentioned that there's so much like movement and these subtle differences. How much time do you have to rehearse at a new venue, and do you change and do you sort of improvise things, or do you try to say, oh well, if this doesn't work, we have to cut it out because or do you find a new solution? How do you adapt to new locations?
We we spend a lot of time beforehand really mapping everything out. Yeah. There's these sort of waypoints that the play follows. So we establish those. The play really takes place at 4 different locations within the landscape. It starts at 1, goes to the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and then it moves back to the 1st. Yeah. So those environments roughly stay the same. It might be a huge field in one place. It might be a hill at another. It might be a kind of an open woods in another. So there is definitely some adaptation that has to take place. Mm-hmm. The transitions between those locations changes quite a bit. Yeah. But a lot of it is very, carefully set and crafted. And it's just kind of tweaking it to fit the new pace, the new route.
And how big is the company as well? Because I don't want people to think this is just like a 2-man show.
No. This is 20 people. We have Emerson and Thoreau, kind of the primary characters, but then we have a whole physical ensemble of actors as well as musicians that tell this really rich and complicated story. So it's not just watching a 2-man show by any means. In fact, Emerson and Thoreau are often very much wrapped up in the ensemble telling this physical story, and highly physical, because being outside the energy is already so kind of diffused, and there's so much going on, right? So to be able to really harness the audience's attention and bring them into the story is a big part of it. But I will say, Sam always says, no matter what year or location we're at, Sam often comes and is a part of the production on some level. And maybe you could talk to it a little bit more, Sam, just about that quality of bringing in the landscape, of recognizing the sort of, all those wonderful little nuances of a new space.
And you're bringing in your own culture, like the 20 people, like the audience members show up and they're like, wait, there's already a party here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's important to name one of the things I think we are most proud of is that in each of these locations that we tour to, we have enlisted a community chorus. So sometimes that's an existing church choir, or sometimes they form specific to this production, but they have learned all of our music. So that 20-person ensemble swells to sometimes 40 or more when they get added to it. So we are both they're the bridge, in my opinion, because they have learned our music and they show up for us in that pre-show time where we're blocking and telling them where to walk. And so it's like, we're walking in and it's a new culture, but wait a minute, that's Aunt Sally and I know her too. So it's like this way in which they've created a bridge for us into that community and that landscape. And I don't know specifically what you're referencing, Tyson, in terms of if I say something.
Well, no, just like that. I think of the number of times that we've circled up and you've just spoken to, if the breeze comes through, if a flock of geese walks through. I mean, we've had buffalo saunter through the middle of our show.
Literally.
Like,
wait, I want to see buffalo in Concord.
Embrace the serendipity and
exactly. That's also what I'm trying to get at, because what do you do if it rains? What do you do if there's a bird that just shows up and won't move, right?
Yeah, and Tyson said at the very beginning, this is about the direct experience of nature. That was the whole intent, and that's what we're trying to do. If you learn nothing about Emerson and Thoreau, but you're sitting there and you take a deep breath and your whole body sinks an inch, and you feel the grass and the breeze and the trees, we won, we did it.
Yeah.
And so to Tyson's point, you already said it, Tyson, but the magical moments for me, I think of that first production out at the Landscape Arboretum in Minnesota. The geese did this, what's our Air Force, that group that flies, in formation. They did a perfect formation as we were ending over the funeral and it was just you could not have cued that.
Yeah.
Impossible, even for a movie, and goose handlers, never. And that
somebody's on your side, right?
Totally. And does and can happen with every show. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's the crows and the birds, sometimes it's the wind and the leaves. So I think the more, I mean, this is getting a little out there woo-woo, but like the more we're connected to the land and the more we're listening to the landscape and as a organism of which the audience is a part of,
Yeah.
like the more nature shows up and adds the touches that are just kind of magical.
And we can't compete with the weather, and we don't want to. We want to embrace it and we want to bring it into the show.
Yeah.
We want people to feel that immediacy. I think of this kind of art farm that we produced the show on, and the ducks and the geese fell in love with our bagpiper. He became like their voice. And during this funeral procession that takes place, they would line up in the funeral procession and they would just go right behind him, 15 foul, just clocking right behind this bagpiper. And I mean, that's kind of even, comedic, but there's also these wonderful little serendipitous events that take place during the show that just elevate it to a whole nother level. You feel like the environment is talking back to the show, and why shouldn't it?
Exactly.
So
yeah.
And like that year in Concord, the sun, we were losing more daylight every day than anticipated, and suddenly lanterns became a part of the show and transformed the last 20 minutes of the piece, because now it had this totally different effect.
Yeah, that was a wonderful discovery, was bringing that for evening performances. If you see a matinee performance, we don't bring out lanterns, but the show typically happens right at dusk. We try to end the show about 15 minutes before dusk, but sometimes that goes into, darkness. So suddenly all these beautiful lanterns comes out, and it just has this whole other magical quality to it.
Right. And I don't want to like skip over or laugh about like the woo-woo part, because I feel like a lot of like tour guides and historians, and I definitely know that it's happened to me, that there's not like a literal haunting. There's not like Halloween-y type ghosts out there, but there's some kind of magic that happens. And I feel like theater is, again, kind of like it creates the language for the magic to maybe most easily express itself.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly what you're talking about, these little things,
Mm-hmm.
as somebody who, like, as a playwright myself, whenever I'm trying to work on a scene about Thoreau or whatever, I feel like I've definitely opened a book at random and I come up with a perfect quote or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's where I feel like my hand is being guided by something. And it's, maybe it's a subconscious thing, maybe it's all in my mind, but I also feel like there are a lot of people in the Concord area who are excited to experience that kind of magic with you, and to experience also collectively and witness it collectively, because like if the bagpiper and the ducks were just something that happened at a rehearsal, right? Or if it was just him, nobody would really believe it. But suddenly it's kind of like, wait, you're surrounded by a crowd. Everybody is seeing this.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's something going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I'll bring us back to is, we talked about the direct experience of nature, and then this notion of like creating community ritual.
Yeah.
Theater at its roots is ritual. And, there's some artists from a century ago who kind of explored that, and that has informed our work too, of just like, what is that experience to bring people into direct experience in community? And you call it what you want. Is it theater? Is it ritual? Is it a walking play? Doesn't really matter to me. If you're there and you're opening to it, then it's working.
And that's what I feel like Concord is. People want some kind of time travel. They want some kind of experience. They want to hang out with these people. Mm-hmm. And how do you, there are historical interpreters who will dress up and who will, do interpretations of somebody from that era. And, that's a really interesting way to go. But when you're doing theater, it's also creating this whole world. and with the narrative and with physical space and all of these layered elements. So I feel like that's like attending the show is one of the most and I don't want to say time travel. I don't want, because it's its own thing, but it's the most immersed I have felt, other than like literally swimming in Walden.
Yeah.
Well, we don't want it to be like just a historical play. That's not the intention. It isn't just to tell this story that happened in our past. It's to show that this sensitivity to nature, these dynamics of humanity are just like deep in all of us. Can we drop down enough and start to experiencing them together on a certain level? So we use so many different theater devices to, old and new, to kind of to bridge that history and not sort of leave it back in the 19th century, but to really like let you feel it now and feel its relevance.
Right. Well, like using lanterns instead of having like somebody following you with a spotlight,
Yeah.
No LEDs in our show. No electronic, amplification of any type. We use, pipes, bagpipes, flutes, violins, drums. It's all acoustic and the
actors are well trained enough to hit like the person sitting far enough in the back.
Oh yeah. We rarely. I don't think we've ever had the issue that people haven't been able to hear, because we're just all blasting out. These are all professional stage actors, and they're really good at projecting and incredible musicians who are part of our band. And so that's a huge part of coming into each space, is making sure the acoustics work so that nobody's struggling. And the physical nature of the show is, one of our goals is that if you couldn't hear the show, if you were watching it from a distance, you could totally drop in. So we're really trying to, telegraph this piece through our bodies.
Yeah. All right. I have a very hard question for you guys. All right. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard of Margaret Fuller?
Yes.
She wants her own show. So what are you guys doing in terms of a sequel, or like, I don't know. I think I mentioned this. I run a group on Facebook called Transcendentalist 2021. Yeah. And, Henry and Waldo are not the only like great characters.
No.
So,
I know. I completely agree.
Well, I think we need to workshop it and get her words into a studio and play.
Yes, please.
I know the trustees have asked us about, exploring other critical kind of thinkers of that time and in different locations that are really relevant to those characters. So Margaret Fuller was just an amazing character. And I love when we find the right actress to play her, because there is this quality we're looking for that's just, bigger than the world. She just kind of has to float out. Her energy is so big. So I completely agree. I also feel like, we've been working a lot, with all these movements that have been going on in the US.
Yeah.
We've also been really working to diversify our ensemble. This isn't a, white American story. This is an American story, and this is a relationship that we all share. Rich, poor, people of color, white people, people.
Exactly. I don't know if you know about the Robbins house, which is like adjacent. They moved it so it's adjacent to the parking lot of the old manse across the street. And there's a wonderful woman named Ellen Garrison, and we have hundreds of her letters. And she was a contemporary of Henry's. She was born 5 years later. And after the Civil War, she actually went south to teach formerly enslaved people how to read. And I feel like she needs a full-blown production, like a musical, like let's like
absolutely
whatever we can
absolutely
to
bring it
talk
on.
about.
Bring it on.
Right.
So
all these themes of like social justice themes, I mean, climate change themes, like the things that they were talking about them are right here. Like on some level, it hasn't changed a bit. Like we still got to make the same choices. So social justice and climate change and as we emerge from COVID, like it's going to be interesting to see how the show plays. I mean, Tyson, you have more sense of like the world of theater right now, but we're going to be among the early productions. I mean, other folks to this point are like taking shows that were supposed to be inside and putting them outside.
I feel like you guys should take classes or should teach classes in how to do that, because as we said before, don't just take a show from inside and just put it outside, please. Right?
Yeah.
No,
So
it is exciting to be on the cusp of it. To be just last summer, we were in. We went back to Massachusetts, and we did some site visits, and there were 2 sanctioned equity shows in America last year. And they were both happening in the Berkshires, with mixed success. Theater, by its nature, is not a COVID-friendly medium. People
are yelling; they're on top of each other.
Yeah,
right?
While we always knew we could make it safe for the audiences because our audiences are pretty expansive, and we can make our house as big as we want and expand the audience out into a field or a wooded area. But, actors are all over each other on stage. And so it's taken, till now to really make sure that everybody's vaccinated and we can work intimately and tell the story that, needs to be told. But we're among some of the few productions that are going to be opening this late summer and fall. You probably heard Broadway is starting to open up again in the fall. And our theater here in Minneapolis won't be open until much later. But
are you talking about the Guthrie?
The Guthrie, yeah. They've been doing a lot of like really interesting virtual programming, but that the live performance aspect has been lost a bit. So it's exciting to be right on the edge of shows emerging again and live theater really emerging again for live audiences. So and as
you mentioned, it's going to be outside. So like no matter where we are in terms of COVID, and we're already like pretty good in terms of vaccinations, and there shouldn't be any worries. But it's going to be outside anyway. So that's a whole other level where you don't have to worry about.
Yes, and this year we typically don't do this. We are rehearsing the show outside as well. So we're rehearsing it under 2 huge catering tents, and that's just an added precaution because of our union and making it safe. And so I think that's actually going to be a good thing for our company to get used to being outside a little bit earlier, because it's always a big transition to start performing outside. And everybody's like, we're really doing this outside. And it's like, yeah, we really are. So
rain or shine, get used to it.
Yeah. And then 3 months later, they're in snow, just like not even blinking an eye. Just another day at the job.
We did do it in 2019. Once we returned from the East Coast, we did it in a whiteout blizzard in Minnesota, which was, the people who came there really wanted to be there. But it was coming down so strong that I remember in a scene watching the hats, just like snow building on the hats. And you couldn't see anything out in the field. You could hear everybody because they were projecting, but you couldn't see anything. It was special. I mean, everybody really appreciated it. We salted and sanded the stages, and it's part of what we do. We love it. We, our company is selected as much on grit as they are on talent, and it's crucial because we have to rise to the occasion, whatever it may be.
Absolutely. Oh my God. I'm so looking forward to seeing not only your next production when it comes here, but also any future productions. And if I ever get to attend in a blizzard, I usually hate being outside, but that would be the one occasion where I would probably love it. So yes.
Yeah, bring it on. We'll keep you warm. We'll have fires and hot toddies and whatever it takes to make you feel warm and cozy in front of a show.
Okay. See, like exploring all of the senses in a positive way. I like this. All right. Any famous last words or any like secrets you want to divulge before we end this fabulous conversation? Sam, what is your secret to theater?
My secret to it? About it?
Yeah.
Breath. It's all about breath.
I like that. So, wait, talk about that just a little bit more. It's deep, but let us,
I mean, it is the unifier. So if we talk about that woo-woo magical moment when nature and audience, and in my opinion, that is created through breath. And one of my teachers, and she just passed this month, Anna Halprin, who's an incredible theater artist, had a movie made about her, maybe called Breath Made Visible, which is just 3 nice words for me. It's like theater is breath made visible. It's us taking something that is constantly happening and giving it form. More to say on that, but I don't know that I've thought a lot about that, but that's what just came through. That's the joy of improvisation.
Yeah. First answer is the best answer, the truest answer. Yeah. And Tyson, what about you?
It's kind of a spin-off of that, but it's connection, the immediacy, both between the actor that I'm on stage with and between the audience. So feeling that tension and that connection and staying right on the edge of it. That's for me as an audience member, that's the most interesting thing to watch. Is that just that connection just burning immediately and staying in that with other people, because that's where it goes from kind of react or sort of acting to just like reacting and being in the space, and kind of suddenly there's this wonderful interchange that isn't just a sort of a intellectual one, but it's bodies communicating, it's movement communicating, it's breath, it's alive. It's really alive. I mean, it's something that those of us who are in live performance have really, really been missing, and something I think we took for granted for a while, but it's there's nothing quite like it. You know, it seems almost cliche to say, but it's having started to go back into live rehearsals with people, there's this wonderful shorthand that happens because that immediate connection can exist. Yep. When you're with other actors who really welcome in other people into their energy and their space, you can create amazing things and craft pieces that are really a delight to be a part of. So, yeah.
Awesome. And I think Henry said something in Walden about how you can bring words of any philosophers or poets to life just by reading it, and you don't interact with any other physical art like that, right? Like you don't interact with sculpture by breathing life into it, or you just look at a painting, everything's distant from you. But thank you both very much for bringing breath and life and connection into our favorite characters, and You've done a great job, and thank you very much for talking to me this afternoon.
Thank you, Kenny. This has been so fun.
Yeah, it's been a total pleasure. It makes me even more excited to get into rehearsal in a couple of weeks. So,
exactly. Well, I guarantee you, there's a huge fan base and audience waiting for you on the East Coast. So, thank you, everybody, and thank you for watching Concord Days.